Welcome to our talk on the future of climate. Might not be people here who think we have much more to say about the future of the climate, but we do. And here with me to start that conversation is Siobhan McQuaid. And Siobhan McQuaid is the principal investigator for Connecting Nature, an €11.4 million 5-year project funded by the EU. Connecting Nature is coordinated by Trinity College Dublin and involves 30 partners across 16 European countries, as well as hubs in Brazil, China, Korea and the Caucasus. This consortium is working with local authorities, communities, industry partners, NGOs and academics who are investing in large-scale implementation of nature-based projects in urban settings. They're measuring the impact of these initiatives on adaptation to the climate emergency, health and well-being, social cohesion and sustainable economic development. They also aim to nurture the growth of commercial and social enterprises with nature-based products and services. Siobhan is also Associate Director of Innovation at the Trinity Centre for Social Innovation and Chair of the European Commission's Working Group on the Nature-Based Economy. And if you are wondering about what all that means, Siobhan is going to come to the stage now and explain a lot of it to you. Thanks, Siobhan.
Thank you, Elaine. Delighted to be here.
And I'm really excited for this conversation, yep. So we'll just get straight into it. So first of all, what is the nature-based economy?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's a very new concept, and it's a concept we know that many people won't be familiar with. Essentially, the nature-based economy it's a paradigm shift in thinking about economic development and the kind of economy we want in the future. So the nature-based economy puts nature and people at the centre of economic development. And it's really based at the centre of the nature-based economy is this concept called nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions, essentially, they flip the perspective of nature being a problem, climate change, biodiversity crisis, and they look at nature as a solution to problems. So if you think, for example, about the heat in cities or the heat waves that we're having, if you think about flooding, if we look at natural solutions to those that exist for millions of years, and it's a lovely segue from Alice's discussion, nature has been used to mitigate against these problems and adapt to climate change for millions of years. So what we specifically look at is the potential for these kind of nature-based solutions to create an alternative source of employment, source of innovation, source of skills, and source of jobs, where really we can look at economic development in the future that works in harmony with nature and is really focused on people and communities.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, to achieve those kind of goals, you probably need some nature-based entrepreneurs or people who are willing to create businesses, commercial businesses even, that can take this opportunity of these nature-based solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, so the nature-based economy is a very broad concept. And in fact, if there's people interested in it, we've just published a paper. This working group that you mentioned has just published an EC expert publication on the topic. Just, I think, 2 weeks ago it was launched, Nature-Based Solutions, a vital role in the nature-based or the nature-positive economy. And the research that we did as part of that study within Trinity is on nature-based enterprises. So we kind of wanted to see, well, it's a very broad concept, but what kind of economic activities can nature support? And my colleague, Esme Hoyman, who works here in Trinity with us, she identified 11 sectors of economic activity where nature-based enterprises and entrepreneurs were active. And some of these are really, really well-known areas, like you have regenerative agriculture, for example, you have sustainable tourism. And then there are other kind of more emerging areas, and they can be from, say, smart technologies for nature. So nature's expensive, you need a lot of technologies to monitor, to manage, to plan nature. And then another area which is growing, and there's a lot of things happening in Ireland in this space, is actually nature-based therapy. For health and well-being. So you might know in Scotland and England, doctors are prescribing nature for people. And there's a whole industry developing around nature-based therapies and so on. So there's a whole range of industry sectors. And I suppose one of the challenges we have is because it's such a new concept, What we're missing really is data and market research to kind of quantify what is the potential for this in every country and in every sector. We do have some indications. Stop me, by the way, if I'm talking too much. We do have some indications. For example, in Europe, Austria would be very much a leader when it comes to, say, green buildings and green infrastructure. And they really work holistically. So the government turned around and said, OK, this is a sector that we want to support into the future. Why do we want to support it? Well, there's already over 500 companies active in that sector, creating thousands of jobs. And they said, well, OK, at the moment, 1 in every 10 roofs in Austria, or flat roofs, is a green roof. If we were to change it, put in place incentives and regulations to change that to 1 in every 2 roofs, that would create 33,000 new jobs by 2030. So the way they're doing that is in a very holistic way. They're kind of, if you like, doing a little bit of the carrot and the stick, but they're really training, putting in place, training and employment or certification for people to be able to provide green roofs which support biodiversity, because there's a lot of green roofs, and in some countries there aren't proper standards and certifications, so they kind of sometimes they're not as good for biodiversity as they could be. But what they're doing is taking this holistic approach, so they're making sure that they're certified, they're putting in place incentives to encourage people to take them up, and really investing in research, innovation, education, monitoring to make sure they're as effective as possible. So, it's a really good example of how a country can lead in that area.
And this investment is being driven by the Austrian government.
Yes.
They're a great example of taking leadership on this and creating kind of a more climate-focused economy. How is Ireland comparing to Austria in that respect?
Can we move on? Ireland is, well, not that I'm aware, Ireland isn't really focused on this area. And I think, this is where it comes back to, what we were talking about at the beginning, that we need a shift in the way we think. So Ireland is still, the parameters, if you like, for economic success in Ireland are, typical KPIs, new enterprises, new startups, how quick can they grow, how quick can they scale, how many jobs can they create, and so on. What the nature-based economy says is you need to think differently. Mm-hmm. You need to think, and your first objective of a nature-based enterprise is creating environmental impact, not economic impact. But that isn't to say that the two are mutually exclusive, because what we've seen is a massive uptake or growth in the number of new startups in this area. And because of the scale of the challenge that they're facing, like ecosystem restoration, for example, it's a massive scale, massive investment needed, massive opportunities for growth. But it's not the first priority is growth. Their first priority is environmental impact. And through environmental impact and reaching environmental impact, there's massive opportunity to scale and create jobs and innovations and these traditional economic parameters. But they're secondary. Nature, people first. Yeah. And that's the concept of a nature-based economy, and that's the mission of a nature-based enterprise. And
I just think it's such a solid argument. I mean, there's opportunities there. There are solid economic opportunities. There's job creation opportunities. That's a very important metric here in Ireland.
Absolutely.
We have a Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation. So who do we need to listen to this? Because the environmental scientists and people like yourself know that these problems exist, know that systemic change needs to happen to get this to turn around and do some sort of a U-turn, or even a slight turn, of course, would be beneficial to all of us. So it's economists that we need and policy people. That's who needs to really be paying attention here.
I mean, a simplistic answer would be everyone. But I have to say, in Connecting Nature, we've organised a lot of events. And I sometimes feel like we're preaching to the converted. I'm sitting in the audience and everybody's nodding and going, yeah. And I find very much, we're talking to ourselves. Like in fairness, who wants to come into a room and listen to the environmental researchers talking about doom and gloom? Whereas what we're trying to do is kind of widen the remit. I'm not an environmental scientist. I sit in the business school in the Centre for Social Innovation. And I see that we really need to be talking to economic policymakers, and we need to bring economic policymakers together with environmental policymakers, because we need both, and we need them to start working together to put in place these kind of, I feel like, carrot and stick measures to really change the way we think about what kind of economy we want in the future. So we really need economic policymakers to be coming to the table with the environmental scientists. And the project that I'm involved in, Connecting Nature, is a great example. It's a collaborative project between the School of Natural Sciences here in Trinity, that have that natural, the knowledge of nature-based solutions, and the School of Business. So it was really funny because we went out to cities and all of the people responsible for developing nature in cities were sitting in the environment departments. And we said, okay, well, if you want funding, you're going to have to go to the economic department. And they're kind of going, oh, we're afraid to talk to them. They think we're the dark green forest people, you know. And then I'm kind of going, well, I'm not afraid to talk to them. So I go and talk to them and they say, we're citizens. We're parents. We want our children to grow up in green cities. We don't want our environment destroyed. Tell us what we can do. Give us the arguments to make this investment. So it's really a case of bringing the two people together. And what we did is we developed tools for environmental departments and environmental heads to put together business cases for nature. Yeah. And one of those arguments is, when you're talking about public policy, is job creation potential and so on.
Yeah. And I mean, governments can be slow to change. Unfortunately, on climate action, they have been too slow, I would absolutely say. And they are starting finally to make some efforts, but we need fast action and we need it now. But we can't count on that. One area that is known for fast innovation and quick responsiveness is that kind of commerce side, the business side. And we're talking here about the business case for this thing. So what I want to know is, we were talking earlier about the future of entrepreneurship and the billion-dollar companies coming out of Ireland. Do you create billion-dollar companies that have nature-based solutions, or is that still just sticking in the same old mindset?
Exactly. Again, when you talk about billion-dollar companies and unicorns, I say, well, they're not the parameters by which we should be measuring success. The types of companies, the nature-based enterprises that we're, trying to put in place measures to support, they look at environmental impact. How many mangroves can we restore? How many coastal regions can we, can we bring back to protect our coastlines and our cities from future flooding and so on? The parameters for success are different. But there is massive opportunities. I mean, the companies that we're dealing with, some of them have impact investors on board, and they're kind of going, okay, the impact investors are really interested in this area. But what the companies are afraid of is this mismatch between what investors want and their focus on economic objectives first, and the mission of these companies, which is really to solve environmental climate change, biodiversity issues first. The two aren't mutually exclusive. It's really important to understand that. We're not saying, that they're all, going to stay small. But the model for scaling is also different. When we work with a lot of nature-based enterprises, what they're really interested in is franchise models for scaling, for example. So instead of scaling themselves, they want to, because nature is so contextual to a local community, to a local, a local environment, they say, well, there's no point in us over here in Germany going to Dublin and putting in place a nature-based solution when it's local contractors that have to maintain it into the long term. So the kind of models of scaling they're interested in is developing franchises across Europe and across the world, and scaling up local contractors to be able to provide those kind of services and so on. So it's a different model. Yeah. But it's one that presents many opportunities.
And if we're talking about value and the very meaning of that word, these would be far more valuable companies to the future of the entire planet, rather than worth $1 billion. Well done. It's fictitious anyway. And I think it's funny that they're called unicorns to begin with. It's big old fiction. We need a different beast entirely to start thinking about these successful companies. We need a more sustainable animal.
Exactly. It's just a different way of thinking. It's not incompatible, but it is a different priority.
Absolutely. And you mentioned impact investing there as well. I'm quite curious about that because it does strike me sometimes impact investment is great because we do need money coming into these projects for them to get off the ground and really make an impact. But is there an element of some impact investment is just to say, oh, but look, we're doing this, we're doing our bit, but we're also funding other stuff that is going to destroy the planet at the end of the day? Is some of it a bit of greenwashing happening there?
I have to say I'm not overly familiar with the impact investment arena, but I'm certainly very familiar with the greenwashing arena, and in terms of, but we're seeing a lot of greenwashing in the corporate world, and some of it is really well known. So we're seeing a lot of companies going, oh right, we have to be seen to be doing good, so let's plant some trees, but and we'll call these a nature-based solution. But they're not a nature-based solution, because what we're seeing is these kind of monoculture plantations going up and destroying native vegetation, which is really biodiversity rich, and putting in place these kind of trees that, yes, they'll soak up loads of carbon, but they won't do much for biodiversity. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of that happening, but I think, again, it just goes back to a fundamental change in attitudes. The attitude, the prevailing attitude seems to be do no harm, okay? So we need to switch that attitude to, instead of saying do no harm, it's like, how can we proactively support businesses which are trying to do good for nature and for people? Yeah. So it's a different, it's a paradigm shift. It's the only way to describe it.
Which brings me to the big question, which is a nature-friendly or even a nature-respecting, even just to get to that level, kind of economy possible within a capitalist system that's all about growth and scale at the end of the day?
Ooh, there's a big question. I'm for fear of repeating myself, but you know, sometimes I don't think the two are like, it's not incompatible. You can achieve economic growth by those traditional, conventional parameters of success by focusing on nature and on people. But, you know, it is possible, but it requires a significant change right across the board. And I think a lot of policymakers have a really important role to play in changing the way, changing those parameters of success. If you think about, Enterprise Ireland, for example, here in Ireland, and you think about what are their selection criteria for high potential startups, and are they the conventional parameters of, milestones in terms of going international in 3 years and, reaching X million and, and so on and so forth? Or should it be about saying, okay, well, what type of businesses? And it's not all businesses. I mean, we're not saying like that this is 100% the future.
Hashtag not all businesses.
Yeah, but I think there is a significant potential there, and we've identified these 11 economic sectors where there is massive potential for growth, but we really need focused research, a lot more investment in research and market studies, which will help economic policymakers make the case for policies put in place to support the transition and growth of these types of businesses and these types of industry. And that is just, it's not happening at the moment. Yeah. And when I say it's not happening, it is happening in some countries. So the example I gave in Austria, the German Development Agency has asked us to advise them on how they can integrate nature-based enterprises into their development strategies. So we're working with them this summer. The French Environment Agency has asked us. Nobody's asked us in Ireland yet.
So we need that to happen first and foremost. We need someone to pick up the phone. And if anyone else here wants to find out more about Connecting Nature, you can visit connectingnature.eu. And thank you so much, Siobhan. Are you available if anyone wants to talk more about this at the event?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure people will have some
questions. Well, I'm based here anyway, so...
Yes, of course. So you'll find Siobhan around Trinity at some point. So thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you for being such a great audience.